You care too much. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep can fix. It doesn't come from working too hard, or staying up too late, or carrying too many responsibilities at once. It comes from something much quieter. It comes from caring about things that most people around you stopped caring about a long time ago. From noticing when someone's smile doesn't reach their eyes. From remembering a small detail about a coworker's life and asking about it weeks later, only to realize they've already forgotten they told you. From carrying the emotional weight of conversations that other people left behind the moment they walked away. You feel things after they're over. That's the part no one talks about. The meeting ends, the dinner finishes, the phone call hangs up, and everyone moves on. But you don't. You sit with what was said, and more importantly, with what was left unsaid. You replay the tension that no one acknowledged. You feel the residue of someone else's pain that they handed you without either of you realizing it. And slowly, over years, you begin to wonder if something is fundamentally miscalibrated in you. If the problem isn't the world, if the problem is simply that you care too much. You've been told this, of course, not always directly. Sometimes it arrives as concern disguised as advice. You need to stop taking everything so personally. You can't save everyone. You need thicker skin. And the people who say it usually mean well, or at least believe they do. But embedded inside that advice is an assumption so quiet you might miss it entirely. The assumption that the depth at which you experience the world is a malfunction, that caring past a certain threshold is a deficiency that mature adults eventually outgrow. They never tell you what you're supposed to replace it with. Carl Jung understood something about this particular form of suffering that most modern psychology still hasn't caught up to. He recognized that the psyche does not produce meaningless signals. When something in you aches, when something in you reaches toward the world with a consistency that defies logic and self-preservation, it is not noise, it is information. It is the self trying to speak through the only language it knows. But the world does not speak that language. The world speaks in outcomes, in transactions, in clean emotional exchanges where the currency is always balanced. You give, I give, you pull back, I pull back. And the person who keeps giving without pulling back, who keeps caring without calculating the return, doesn't look generous inside that system. They look broken. And here is where the first wound forms. Not from the people who don't care about you. From the slow, corrosive realization that the thing you do most naturally, the thing that feels least negotiable inside you, is the same thing the world keeps telling you to do less of. You begin to carry a contradiction that has no resolution. Be yourself, but be less of yourself. Care, but not that much. Feel, but within acceptable limits. Show up, but don't show too much. The contradiction doesn't just confuse you. It splits you. Jung gave this split a name, though not in the way self-help culture has reduced it. He called it the tension between the persona and the deeper self. The persona is the version of you that learns the acceptable frequency. It watches how other people operate and calibrates accordingly. It learns to say, "I'm fine," with the right amount of casualness. It learns not to follow up on conversations that others consider finished. It learns to swallow the impulse to ask, "Are you okay?" when something in you already knows the answer. The persona is not false. It is strategic. It is the self doing what it must to survive in environments that punish depth. But survival and wholeness are not the same thing. And the cost of maintaining that persona year after year, in every room, in every relationship, in every moment where your instinct says one thing and your training says another, is a kind of internal erosion that most people won't notice until it's already done its damage. The damage doesn't announce itself. It accumulates in the places you stop looking. It shows up in the way you apologize before you speak. In the slight flinch when someone asks what you actually want, because the question itself feels dangerous, as though wanting something for yourself might disqualify you from the role you've been playing. It shows up in the relationships you stay in too long, not because they nourish you, but because leaving would require you to acknowledge that your care was never being matched. And that acknowledgement carries a weight most people don't understand. Because for someone who cares deeply, admitting that the caring wasn't returned isn't just disappointing, it's disorienting. It restructures the entire story. If the love wasn't mutual, then what was it? If the effort wasn't valued, then what were you building? If your presence in someone's life was tolerated rather than treasured, then every memory of trying harder, giving more, showing up more fully becomes evidence of something you're not ready to name. So, you don't name it. You absorb it instead. You file it somewhere beneath the surface and keep going, because that is what you have always done. And the next time someone needs you, you show up again. Not because you've forgotten the cost, but because the alternative, withholding yourself, feels like a betrayal of the only thing about you that ever felt real. This is the trap that Jung would have recognized immediately. He wrote extensively about what happens when a person identifies too completely with one aspect of themselves. When the caring, the empathy, the relentless emotional attunement becomes not just something you do but everything you are, the psyche loses its balance. The parts of you that are allowed to say no, to feel anger, to put yourself first without guilt, those parts don't disappear. They get pushed into shadow. And the shadow of the person who cares too much is not cruelty. It is resentment, not the loud, confrontational kind. Something slower, a quiet bitterness that builds in the gap between what you give and what you receive. A growing irritation with the very people you chose to care for, not because they've done something terrible, but because they simply continued being themselves while you continued exceeding yourself. You resent them for not noticing what it costs you. And then you resent yourself for resenting them, because caring people are not supposed to feel that way. So the resentment goes underground too. It joins the shadow, and the shadow grows. Jung would say that the shadow is not the enemy. He would say it is the unlived self. The parts of your personality that were deemed unacceptable either by your environment or by your own internal tribunal, and were subsequently exiled from conscious expression. For most people, the shadow contains aggression, selfishness, vanity, the qualities that polite society trains out of us early. But for you, the shadow contains something different. It contains your own needs. That is the particular cruelty of being someone who cares too much. The thing you've exiled isn't darkness. It's the completely ordinary, completely human experience of wanting something for yourself without earning it through service to others first. Wanting rest without having completed every task. Wanting attention without having first made yourself useful. Wanting to be chosen not for what you provide, but for who you are when you are providing nothing at all. That want lives in the shadow because at some point, probably very early, you learned that it was not safe to express directly. Maybe a parent only showed warmth when you were helpful. Maybe love in your household was conditional on performance, on emotional labor, on being the stable one, the easy one, the one who never added to the burden. And your young mind, doing what young minds do, drew a conclusion that became invisible through repetition. I am loved for what I give. Therefore, what I am without giving must not be enough. That conclusion is still running. You can hear it in the way you describe yourself when you're being honest. Not in the polished version you offer to strangers, but in the quiet interior monologue that runs beneath everything. The one that says you're a lot. The one that measures your worth by how seamlessly you can fold yourself into someone else's comfort. The one that treats your own emotional needs as a logistical problem to be solved privately, preferably without inconveniencing anyone. And the world confirms this constantly, because the truth about people who care too much is that they are extraordinarily convenient to be around. They anticipate, they adjust, they absorb tension so that others don't have to sit in it. They make rooms easier, conversations smoother, silence less uncomfortable. And because this labor is invisible, because it doesn't look like work, because it wears the face of warmth and generosity rather than effort, it is almost never acknowledged as something that has a cost. People do not thank the thermostat for keeping the room comfortable. They simply expect it to continue. This is not a metaphor about ingratitude. It is a structural observation about how social systems treat their most emotionally attuned members. The person who cares the most becomes the regulator, the one who tracks the emotional weather, the one who notices when someone has gone quiet, when a joke landed wrong, when the energy in the room shifted in a direction that could become dangerous. And they intervene quietly, automatically, at their own expense. Jung saw something profound in this dynamic. He understood that the persona, the social mask we construct, is not simply about hiding the unacceptable parts of ourselves. It is also about performing a function that the group requires. And once the group has assigned you a function, deviating from it is experienced not as personal growth but as betrayal. This is why the moment you stop being endlessly available, people don't say, "I understand." They say you've changed, and they do not mean it as a compliment. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs exclusively to people who are surrounded by others. It's not the loneliness of isolation. It's the loneliness of being constantly present for people who have never once asked what that presence costs you. Of being the listener in every conversation, of being the one who remembers, who checks in, who follows up, who holds space, and realizing slowly, in a way that arrives more as exhaustion than epiphany, that if you stopped initiating, most of those connections would simply go silent. Not because people are malicious, but because they never had to develop the muscle you were born exercising. This is the realization that sits at the center of the pattern and refuses to be softened. The people in your life are not villains. They are simply people who found someone willing to do the emotional work for free. And like anyone operating inside a system that doesn't charge them, they kept consuming. They didn't exploit you through calculation. They exploited you through comfort, through the sheer ease of never having to be the one who reaches out first, who notices first, who cares first. Your exhaustion subsidized their ease. And the most disturbing part is not that they let it happen. The most disturbing part is that you designed it that way. Not consciously, not maliciously, but structurally. Every relationship you built was built on the same invisible contract. I will care for you in ways you will not be required to reciprocate. And in exchange, I will receive the only thing I know how to ask for. Proximity, not intimacy, not equality, not the kind of mutual recognition that Jung believed was necessary for genuine human connection. Just proximity. Just the assurance that someone is there, that you are not alone, that your presence is at least tolerated, even if it is never fully met. You confused being needed with being wanted. And that confusion cost you years. Jung described the process of individuation as the most important psychological journey a human being can undertake. Not the most pleasant, not the most comfortable, the most important. He defined it, in essence, as the process of becoming who you actually are. Beneath the layers of adaptation, beneath the persona, beneath the roles you were assigned before you were old enough to refuse them. And he was very clear about one thing: it begins with loss. Not the loss of a person or a job or a relationship, though those may be the surface events that trigger it. The real loss is subtler. It is the loss of the story you told yourself about why you are the way you are. The flattering version, the one where your relentless care is a virtue, where your inability to stop giving is evidence of a good heart, where your exhaustion is noble and your silence is strong and your willingness to disappear into other people's needs is somehow a sign of emotional maturity. That story has to die. And its death does not feel like liberation. It feels like falling, because the story wasn't just a narrative. It was architecture. It was the structure that held your identity together. Remove it, and what remains is a question you've been avoiding for as long as you can remember. If I am not the one who cares, then who am I? This is the question the shadow has been holding for you. This is what lived in all those exiled parts, all those buried needs, all those moments of resentment you swallowed before they could reach your voice. The shadow wasn't trying to destroy you. It was trying to complete you. It was holding the parts of your identity that the persona couldn't afford to carry, keeping them alive in the dark until you were finally ready to look. Most people never look. They continue performing the version of themselves that earned the earliest approval. They refine it. They build entire lives around it. Careers chosen because they allow for constant service. Relationships chosen because they guarantee being needed. Friendships maintained not through mutual joy but through the quiet, compulsive maintenance of emotional infrastructure that only one person ever bothers to repair. And they call this a life. Jung would have called it something else. He would have called it a prolonged avoidance of the self. A life lived entirely in the persona, with the shadow growing larger and heavier in the basement of the psyche, pressing against the floor with increasing force. He wrote that what we do not bring to consciousness comes to us as fate. Meaning that the needs you refuse to acknowledge don't simply vanish. They begin to shape your life from a position you cannot see. They choose your partners for you. They engineer your disappointments. They construct with terrible precision the exact situations that will force you to finally feel what you have been refusing to feel. Your pattern of caring too much was never random. It was the psyche solving for a wound it could not name. If love was conditional on service, then the unconscious mind builds a life where service never stops. If attention was earned through self-erasure, then the unconscious mind ensures you are always erasing. Not because it wants you to suffer, but because it is replaying the original equation over and over, hoping that this time the answer will be different. This time the giving will be enough. This time someone will turn around and say, "You can stop now. You are always enough without this." No one has said it. So the pattern continues. But there is a moment, and it comes differently for everyone, when the exhaustion outweighs the fear. When the cost of maintaining the persona exceeds the cost of letting it fall. When you find yourself sitting in a room full of people you have poured yourself into, and feeling a clarity that is almost physical, that not one of them knows you. They know the function you perform. They know the warmth you provide. They know the version of you that makes their lives easier. But you, the actual you, the one with needs and edges and hungers and an anger that has been composting in the dark for years, that person is a stranger in their own life. That moment is not a breakdown. It is the beginning of individuation. And individuation, despite what the word might suggest, is not about becoming selfish. This is the misunderstanding that keeps people trapped the longest. The belief that the only alternative to caring too much is caring too little. That if you stop pouring yourself into others, you become cold, closed, indifferent. That boundaries are just a polite word for withdrawal. That protecting your energy is another way of saying you've given up on people. It is none of these things. What individuation actually asks of you is far more difficult than selfishness. Selfishness is easy. It requires no awareness, no confrontation with the interior, no willingness to hold contradictions. What Jung was describing is something else entirely. He was describing the capacity to care without disappearing, to feel without being consumed, to remain open to the world while also, for the first time, remaining loyal to yourself. That sounds simple. It is the hardest thing a person like you will ever do. Because loyalty to yourself means tolerating the discomfort of someone else's disappointment. It means allowing a silence to exist without rushing to fill it. It means watching someone struggle with a feeling and choosing not to fix it for them. Not because you don't care, but because their struggle is not yours to metabolize. It means sitting in the unbearable tension of being perceived as less generous than you used to be, by people who only valued you for your generosity in the first place. It means grieving relationships that cannot survive your wholeness, and some will not survive it. This is the cost that no one mentions when they talk about growth. Some of the people in your life are only there because of the dynamic you maintained, because you were willing to be the one who gave more, asked less, absorbed the discomfort, kept the emotional machinery running in the background. When you stop doing that, when you begin to occupy your actual shape rather than the shape that was most convenient for others, some people will not recognize you. They will call it distance. They will call it coldness. They will say you've changed. And what they will mean is that you've stopped being useful in the specific way they had come to depend on. Let them. This is not cruelty. This is the natural consequence of a self that has finally stopped negotiating its own existence. The people who stay, who meet your actual edges with curiosity rather than accusation, who are willing to know you in your full dimension rather than only in your function, those are the ones who are always capable of real connection. They were just hidden behind the crowd of people who are drawn to what you could provide. Jung believed that the self, the true self, the one that emerges through the long and painful process of integration, is not a fixed thing. It is not a destination you arrive at and then maintain. It is a living negotiation between light and shadow, persona and depth. The part of you that learned to care and the part of you that learned to hide. The work is never complete. The tension never fully resolves. But something changes in the quality of your presence when you stop pretending the tension isn't there. You become less comfortable to be around and far more real. There is a sentence that has likely been forming somewhere inside you for longer than you realize. It doesn't arrive with drama. It arrives with the quiet, enormous weight of something that has always been true, but was never safe enough to say aloud. I am not too much. I was simply in rooms that were too small. Jung spent his life arguing that the greatest act of psychological courage is not to overcome the self but to become it fully. Without apology, without trimming the parts that others find inconvenient, without performing a version of depth that is acceptable while withholding the version that is true. The world will not applaud this. It will, however, begin to rearrange itself around you in ways you did not think possible. Not because you forced it, but because something in the architecture of human interaction responds to a person who has stopped pretending, who has stopped managing, who has stopped caring in the desperate, depleting, self-erasing way they were taught, and has begun instead to care in the only way that is sustainable, from fullness, not from debt. And the quiet, permanent truth beneath all of it, the one that no framework can contain and no amount of insight can fully soften, is simply this: you were never wrong for caring. You were only wrong about what it required you to lose.